They laughed at Earth, not in secret meetings or hushed tones. No, the Galactic Empire laughed openly, boldly, across every system. Earth was a backwater mudball, weak, disorganized, primitive. They called it a blue stain, a joke of a planet barely worthy of extermination, let alone conquest. No one remembered who made first contact. Some say it was a bored scout from the Valari Dominion who stumbled across the planet while chasing a rogue traitor. Others claim it was a diplomatic test, just to see if humanity could even form a sentence without drooling. Whatever the truth, the Empire didn't come in peace. They came with terms: surrender, kneel, serve. The usual demands they gave lesser species before harvesting them for labor and resources. Earth refused. That part still stings them, even now. They expected Earth's defiance to last a week, 2 at most. What could a bunch of tribal nations with barely unified governments offer against fleets that blotted out the sky? They bombed cities, scorched forests, poisoned rivers. They took millions. No warning, no mercy. Entire countries vanished under plasma fire. Their broadcasts showed burning capitals and shattered towers, thinking it would break human will. It didn't. Instead, it awakened something older, something feral. By the time the Empire realized what was happening, Earth had gone dark. No signals, no surrenders, just silence. They thought the species had been broken. What really happened was worse. Earth had stopped broadcasting because it had started building, digging, forging. The resistance wasn't clean or noble. It wasn't polished with honor codes and pristine uniforms. It was ugly, desperate, and bloody. And that's what made it lethal. His name was Bishop, just Bishop. No rank, no badge. He wasn't born a soldier. Nobody on Earth was. They became one out of necessity. He'd been a mechanic, fixing trash haulers in the freezing hangars of old North American cities. The first time the Empire came through his town, they took his brother. Second time, they took his wife. By the third, Bishop was the one doing the taking. He moved like a shadow across the ruins, turning scrapyard machines into death traps, building crude pulse rifles out of scavenged components. Others followed. Not because he was charismatic. He wasn't. Not because he gave speeches. He barely spoke. They followed him because he survived. And he made sure his people did too. The Empire thought they'd invaded a planet. What they really did was cage a cornered animal and poke it too many times. Humanity didn't fight fair. They didn't care about rules of engagement. They used guerrilla tactics, chemical sabotage, psychological warfare. They hacked Empire drones using devices made from children's toys. They poisoned food supplies, hijacked dropships, turned prisoners into living bombs. And every time the Empire retaliated, they made the same mistake. They tried to break humanity through fear. But fear was a currency humans had long spent. 1 year after the invasion, Earth was still standing. Not proudly, not beautifully, but standing. Covered in ash and smoke, bodies in the streets, cities half buried. But alive. And angry. That's when Bishop captured a patrol frigate. It was small, outdated, and barely space-worthy. But it flew. And more importantly, it had jump capability. When Bishop walked into that ship, flanked by 12 men and 1 woman who had once been a teacher before her school was turned into rubble, he didn't just step into the stars. He brought a war with him, a human war, and the Empire was about to learn what it meant to laugh at a species that had lost everything. The captured frigate was old, smelled like rusted metal, dead fuel, and something far worse. Fear. Not human fear. Alien fear. The kind that stunk of superiority recently shattered. Bishop stood at the helm, his calloused fingers resting on the control panel like he was reading a sacred script. The lights flickered, dim blue pulses along the interior walls. Technology far beyond Earth's, but not unfamiliar anymore. Humans were quick learners, especially when failure meant extinction. They didn't rename the ship. No time for symbolism or poetry. It was a tool, not a shrine. It was the same way Bishop saw himself. "Talon 4 reporting," said a voice behind him. That was Monroe. Blunt, solid-built, the kind of man who didn't smile even before the war. He used to be a prison guard. Now he was in charge of the makeshift armory. "Fusion cells topped, hulls patched, engines running hotter than it should, but it'll jump." Bishop didn't nod, didn't grunt. He just stared at the stars outside the viewplate. Not out of awe, not anymore. Stars were enemy territory now. Dots of light hiding monsters with crowns and fleets. "Set course for Zarn Delta," Bishop said finally. Monroe didn't ask why. No one did. That was the thing about survivors. They didn't waste time questioning a man who'd crawled out of a pit they were still trying to climb out of. Zarn Delta was one of the Empire's minor outposts. Not heavily guarded, not important. But strategic. It was a trade relay point between core systems and the outlying colonies. More importantly, it was where the Empire processed prisoners, human prisoners. There was no silence on the ship, just the sound of a wounded engine and desperate hands making last-minute adjustments. Micah, the former schoolteacher turned engineer, cursed under her breath as she rewired a console using copper wires stripped from a ventilation panel. "We shouldn't be flying this thing," she muttered, not to anyone, just into the chaos. "No," Monroe said, wiping oil from his face, "but we are." The jump was rough. It felt like the ship was being dragged through broken glass. The crew gritted their teeth. No fancy shock absorbers, no stabilizing fields. Just grit and pain. But when the stars stabilized, when the fracture lines in space sealed shut behind them, they were there. Zarn Delta floated before them like a fat, glowing leech. A station built for comfort, not war. Gold plating, soft curves, decorative satellites. It was the Empire's way of showing off. As if aesthetics could replace steel. Bishop stood silent, watching the rotating ring of the station. He didn't blink. "What's the plan?" Micah asked. Bishop didn't turn. "Same as always." "Which is?" "Break everything." They came in fast. No warnings, no transmissions. The Empire didn't think anyone would be stupid enough to attack an outpost. They didn't have alarms for suicide missions. So when the frigate's stolen clearance code failed, and the station finally realized something was wrong, it was too late. Monroe fired the first shot. Plasma burst straight into the comms relay. Silence followed. Then confusion. Then panic. Inside the station, it was chaos. Human prisoners had been kept like livestock, stacked in narrow cages, injected with compliance drugs, stripped of names. Some had forgotten who they were. Some had forgotten they were human. When the first explosion rocked the station, they thought it was another purge. Then the walls cracked open, and they saw faces. Human faces. Armed, armored, unshaved, and unbroken. Bishop led the charge through the prison wing. He didn't scream. He didn't rally. He just moved forward, pulse rifle tight to his shoulder, firing in steady, practiced bursts. Empire guards were trained for rebellion, for riots. Not this. Not humans shooting first. Bishop dropped 2 guards before the rest even turned around. Monroe slammed through the blast door with a makeshift breaching charge. Micah followed, dragging 3 prisoners out of a burning cell block. Some prisoners couldn't walk. Some were blind. Some were already dead inside. But a few, just a few, stood up when the smoke cleared and reached for weapons. And that was enough. The battle lasted 14 minutes. 14 minutes of teeth and blood and heat. When it ended, Zarn Delta burned like a falling sun. Bishop didn't stay to gloat. They weren't there for revenge. Not just yet. They loaded the prisoners, those who could still stand, those who could still think, onto the frigate and vanished before the Empire's reinforcements arrived. Back in the void, the rescued huddled in silence. Where are we going?" one of them asked, barely a whisper. Bishop didn't answer, not because he didn't know, but because the question itself no longer mattered. They weren't going anywhere. They were becoming something. Days passed, maybe weeks, hard to tell in space. The frigate stank now, too many bodies, too little food. Every time they jumped to a new coordinate, they lost another piece of the ship. The air recycler wheezed like an old man dying. Monroe kept saying it was temporary, but no one believed him. They had no home. Earth was still under siege. They had no command, no support. What they had was a name now, whispered in fear across the Empire's comms. The Scourge, a rogue unit, unidentified, human, and dangerous. Empire patrols began tightening. Stations went into lockdown. Diplomats were recalled. Fear was good, but it wasn't enough. They needed more. So Bishop gave the order that changed everything. "We're taking a dreadnought," he said. The crew stared at him like he'd gone insane. He probably had. Dreadnoughts were the Empire's crown jewels, city-sized warships, carriers, fortresses. No human had even seen one up close and lived. Micah slammed her fist against the panel. "We're not ready. We barely made it out of the last jump alive." Bishop looked at her. Calm. Cold. "Then we die trying." Monroe, to no one's surprise, didn't argue. He just started loading munitions. They didn't tell the rescued prisoners. No point. They were barely clinging to hope as it was. Most had stopped speaking. Their eyes were hollow, like mirrors showing only loss. But when the old frigate crept up to the dreadnought's blind side, hidden among asteroid debris, they saw something shift. The ship was massive. It blocked out half the stars. Black steel, blood-red insignia, endless turrets along its flanks. It was docked, refueling, guards minimal. It was the closest it would ever be to vulnerable. Bishop suited up in silence. His armor was scratched, mismatched, and pieced together from looted tech. But it worked. Behind him, 20 survivors readied weapons. Not soldiers, just broken people with something left to kill. They breached through a cargo bay, silent, surgical. They moved like ghosts, no grand firefight, no alarms, just quick death and stolen codes. Within minutes, they were inside the control chamber. Mika hacked the bridge systems. Monroe held the rear. Bishop took the center. "Firewalls are heavier," Micah warned. "This isn't a station, it's an apex predator." "Can you take it?" Bishop asked. She looked at him, just long enough to show her cracked lips and blackened eyes, and smiled. "I'll burn the whole thing." It took 36 minutes. 36 minutes of running code, slicing locks, redirecting power, and disabling AI protocols. But when it was over, the dreadnought belonged to them. To humans. The dreadnought's engines roared. Its lights flared red. The old frigate was left behind, drifting in silence. Now they had a warship. Bishop walked the command deck. Below him, the galaxy stretched open, ripe and vulnerable. This wasn't a resistance anymore. This was a reckoning. The dreadnought was alive, not in the sense of AI or sentient machinery. No, it didn't think. But it breathed, it pulsed, and now it was in human hands. A ship designed to control systems, crush rebellions, and level moons had become the new heart of Earth's fury, and it beat with rage. The bridge was cold, metallic, lined with obsidian-colored command terminals and glowing panels written in Empire glyphs. Useless now. Micah had overwritten the interfaces in less than a day. Human code infected the ship like a virus, rewiring, replacing, mutating. They called it Revenant now, because it had died once under the Empire's flag and been reborn under theirs, a fitting name for a ghost full of vengeance. Bishop stood at the main viewport, watching the stars wheel by as they cruised silently toward the outer rim. He hadn't spoken much since the capture. He didn't need to. His presence was command enough. But something was building inside him. It wasn't pride. It was pressure. The kind that came with purpose. Below deck, Monroe and a squad of rescued prisoners-turned-fighters ran combat drills. The training wasn't pretty. Bare fists, improvised weapons, and hard knocks. But it worked. They were learning what the Empire never expected humans to master. Unity, under pain. Micah hadn't left engineering for over 30 hours. She had a pile of ration packs next to her console and 3 energy stimulants pulsing in her veins. Her fingers were stained with oil and interface gel, her eyes dark-ringed with exhaustion. "I've accessed 2 of the main railguns," she reported over the intercom, her voice hoarse. "But the 3rd's fused with a security lock. I'll need another day." "You've got 12 hours," Bishop replied flatly. She didn't argue. They had a mission now, something beyond survival. They were heading to Kirillin Prime. It was one of the Empire's core planets, not the capital but close, a beacon of culture, arrogance, and cruelty. It was where the Empire paraded its conquests, where humans had been sold as slaves during the first year of the war, where propaganda broadcasts showed primitive Earthlings being domesticated like animals. They were going to burn it. The Revenant emerged from subspace just outside the defense grid. Silent, cloaked in distortion fields that Micah barely understood. Empire sensors were calibrated to detect known threats, not themselves. Bishop ordered a full systems check. Weapons, engines, comms, all green. They didn't need finesse. They needed destruction. "Target power stations first," he said. "Then comm towers. Then fuel reserves." Monroe nodded. "Civilians?" Bishop didn't blink. They watched. A moment passed. That was all the conversation they needed. The first shot from Revenant's railgun tore through atmosphere like a god's hammer. It cracked the primary power grid and left the night sky glowing with falling sparks. The second hit a comm tower, ripping it into steel confetti. Panic spread through Kirillin Prime like fire. Their security forces scrambled, launching interceptors, deploying ground troops, but it was chaos. No one expected an Empire dreadnought to turn traitor. The signals screamed betrayal. Commanders hesitated. Some refused to fire, thinking it was a test. By the time clarity returned, half the city was gone. Revenant didn't pause. Bishop gave the order to descend. The dreadnought lowered through thick clouds, a black mass that blotted out the sun. Its hull groaned under atmospheric pressure, but it held. The anti-gravity fields kicked in, stabilizing the descent as landing pods prepared for drop. Bishop, Monroe, and 20 armed fighters boarded the first pod. "Give them something to remember," Bishop said before sealing the hatch. The pod screamed through the sky, trailing flame and fury. It slammed into a central square once used for Empire celebrations. Statues of overlords shattered under the impact. Marble crumbled, civilians ran, soldiers fired. Bishop stepped out of the smoke like death-given form, pulse rifle barking. Headshots, chest shots, no wasted bullets. Monroe covered the left flank, a heavy cannon clutched like a toy in his massive hands. The squad moved like wolves through the city, carving a path toward the broadcast tower. That's where they'd send the message. Not to negotiate, not to plead, but to promise. The fighting was brutal. Empire soldiers were well-trained, well-armed, but predictable. Human rage was chaos. Tactical, clever, suicidal chaos. A trio of fighters flanked a mech patrol, using sewer access to emerge behind it and plant explosives. Another group hijacked a hover transport and drove it straight into a command checkpoint, jumping out seconds before detonation. Losses were expected. 2 of the prisoners who had barely learned to shoot were gunned down near the Western Plaza. Another bled out near the tramway after taking a plasma shot to the gut. No medics, no prayers, just vengeance. They reached the broadcast station after 2 hours of close-quarter combat. The building was fortified, but its internal defenses had already been gutted by orbital strikes. Smoke curled from the top floors, and the security gates hung twisted from their hinges. Inside, Bishop found the control room untouched. The Empire had rigged it to survive everything, except its own arrogance. He sat in the chair. The holocams activated. Monroe stood behind him, face hard. Micah appeared on screen in the corner, patched through from the Revenant. "You're live," she said. Bishop didn't clear his throat, didn't prepare a speech. He just spoke. "This is Bishop, Earthborn, survivor." His voice was rough, deep, unwavering. "You told us we were nothing. You told us we'd kneel, that our species would vanish into servitude or ash." He leaned forward. We listened. The screen behind him showed burning towers, falling Empire flags, human soldiers pulling down monuments with steel cables. "Now we speak." He paused. "We are not asking for mercy. We're not coming for peace. We're coming for justice." Another pause. "And there is no mercy in justice." He cut the feed. The aftermath was a blood-slicked page of history. The Empire responded within hours. 50 warships dispatched, a full battalion en route. But by then, Bishop and his crew were gone. Revenant had already slipped back into subspace, dragging with it stolen Empire data, 100 new fighters, and the burning symbol of human defiance. The galaxy trembled. On planets that had mocked Earth, leaders held emergency sessions. On worlds where humans were enslaved, whispers turned to resistance. And in the heart of the Empire's inner council, panic spread like infection. Who were these humans? How had they taken a dreadnought? Why didn't they break? The answer was simple. They had nothing left to lose. And when a species loses everything, it becomes something terrifying. Back aboard Revenant, the mood was quiet. Not solemn. Focused. The ship hummed with the energy of stolen pride. Bishop walked the main corridor slowly, nodding to passing crew. Fighters, survivors, monsters in their own right now. Monroe stood by the hangar, inspecting scavenged weapons from Kirellan's ruins. "They're scared," he said. "Good," Bishop replied. "They'll hit back hard." "I know." Monroe paused. "We ready?" Bishop looked at him, eyes like carved stone. "We weren't ready when they came to Earth. We bled. We burned." He stepped past him. "Now it's their turn." They retaliated. The assault on Kirellan Prime hadn't just been a wound. It was an embarrassment. An entire world defiled by a species they'd declared inferior. By a stolen dreadnought, no less. That part enraged them most. A symbol of might repurposed into a ghost ship carrying Earth's defiance. Now they sent a fleet. 12 warships, 3 cruisers, a siege frigate. No less than 30,000 Empire soldiers across their holds, trained to erase what they called contamination. Bishop read the intelligence reports from the bridge of the Revenant. Empire data wasn't encrypted well anymore, not against Micah. She was chewing through their firewalls faster than they could rewrite them. "They're pissed," she said flatly, watching rows of intercepted comms scroll past her cracked display. "Command wants you alive. Or your head." Bishop didn't smile. "They're not getting either. The Revenant couldn't run forever. Fuel was finite. Systems needed repair. But Bishop wasn't planning on running. He was planning on making the Empire hurt. Deep Space System. Arax-9 was uninhabited by sentient life, but rich in mining stations, most of them automated. More importantly, it had 3 refueling depots critical to the Empire's resource chain. A strike there wouldn't win the war, but it would bleed them hard. That's where Revenant set course. It wasn't the kind of war humans were good at on paper. They didn't have numbers, didn't have backup, didn't have allies. But they had will. And they had madness. And that made them something else entirely. Something the Empire still didn't know how to counter. The Arax-9 ambush began in silence. No grand announcements, no pre-battle fanfare. Just the sudden, screaming descent of drop pods from low orbit. They punched into the largest refinery station with such force that the station's core sensors mistook the impact for asteroid collision. Bishop led the charge again. Helmet on, pulse rifle prepped, grenade launcher strapped to his back. He moved through the outer corridor of the station like a predator in a cage of sheep. Empire technicians scrambled for cover. Security bots engaged too late. The first room fell in 12 seconds. Monroe came in through the maintenance shaft with a detachment of 4 new fighters, ex-prisoners who'd earned their place with grit and pain. They weren't polished, they weren't disciplined, but they were lethal, and they didn't stop moving. The refinery's internal guards fell back toward the reactor core. They thought it was defensible. Bishop disagreed. He sent 2 of the new fighters through the vent systems with explosives. One didn't make it, shot through the rib cage by a plasma drone. The other, name was Hardin, if Bishop remembered right, got through and wired the fusion pipes. 30 seconds later, the reactor core was full of smoke, fire, and the remains of every Empire soldier who thought steel was safety. Bishop emerged from the smoke and gave the order to scavenge every scrap of usable fuel. They loaded the stolen energy cores into a repurposed cargo hauler and launched back toward the Revenant, just in time to see the horizon bend unnaturally. Micah screamed over comms, "Jump trace! They're here!" The Empire fleet had arrived. The space around Arax-9 bloomed with ships. The Empire didn't skimp on force projection. They were done underestimating humans. Bishop watched from the command deck as cruisers spread across the system like predators boxing in prey. "They'll pin us from all directions," Monroe said, arms folded. "Standard net maneuver. Force a jump, track the trace, then drop a null field." Micah chimed in, her voice tight. "And we can't jump blind. We haven't repaired the nav stabilizer." "So," Monroe asked, "what's the plan?" Bishop stared at the map for a moment, then pointed. "There." A small moon on the far side of the system, ice-covered. No settlements, no heat signals. "Hide?" Monroe asked, a little disbelief in his tone. "Trap." They set the bait with calculated desperation. Left a false trail, deliberate broadcast pulses showing jump instability, as if the Revenant had tried to escape and failed. The Empire took it. 3 warships peeled from the main fleet and followed the signals to the icy moon, weapons hot. What they didn't expect was what lay beneath the ice. Old mining infrastructure, abandoned by the Empire over a decade ago. But not dead. Bishop had studied the station maps in the hours before the assault. He knew the layout. More importantly, he knew how to weaponize it. They landed silently. Set charges. Wired the main shaft with explosives. Created kill zones and fallback positions. And then they waited. The first drop squads landed with arrogance. High-tier armor, auto-lock targeting systems, atmospheric walkers, Empire elite. Bishop gave no warnings. The first squad stepped into the entrance shaft and vanished in a burst of fire and screaming metal. The second was smarter, slower, but they were still predictable. The fight inside the station lasted almost an hour. A brutal, intimate brawl of close quarters. Pulse rounds, blades, blunt trauma. One of Bishop's men, Soren, was caught in a grenade burst and lost both legs. He kept shooting from the ground until he ran out of ammo. Then he used a broken pipe. By the time the Empire pulled back, half their landing force was dead. But they still had orbit. The Revenant was under fire now, its shields cracking, hull screaming under plasma barrage. Micah screamed into the comm. "We can't hold orbit. We need to jump." "We don't have the stabilizer," Monroe shouted. Bishop clicked in calmly. "Override the limiter." "That could fry the core." "Then we fry." They jumped, not cleanly, not safely. The Revenant tore through space with a soundless scream. The drive stuttered mid-jump, and for a moment every light on the ship blinked out. Every system went dead. Then, with a violent pulse of artificial gravity and shattered internal panels, they emerged. Somewhere. No one knew where, but they were alive. The damage was bad, worse than they'd ever taken. The outer hull was ruptured in 3 places. Engine thrusters were melted slag. Half the comms were down. 4 crew were dead, including Micah's second-in-command, a skinny teenager who'd once been a street kid in the ruins of Berlin. She didn't cry. She didn't even flinch. She just kept working, rerouting systems, welding by hand with shaking fingers. "We're not going to last like this," Monroe said quietly as he joined Bishop on the observation deck. "No." "No backup." "No." Monroe looked at him. "So what now?" Bishop didn't answer right away. He looked out the viewport. Stars. Endless, indifferent stars. And then he spoke. "We make one last move." The jump had nearly torn the Revenant apart. What remained of the dreadnought now drifted in a dead zone of space. No stars, no comm relays, nothing but static. A graveyard sector. No system records. No nav charts. It was where damaged ships went to vanish, and if fate had its way, that's where the Revenant would stay. Except fate had never met Bishop. Repairs started immediately, not because they thought they could fix it, but because if they didn't keep moving, they'd start thinking. And if they started thinking, they'd realize how close they were to the end. Micah sat waist-deep in an open panel, covered in burns, bruises, and the dried blood of a split lip. She hadn't slept in 2 days. "We lost the forward thrusters permanently," she muttered. "I might be able to give you limited burst, but not much more than a lurch. Weapons systems, maybe 50%. If we fire one more volley from the main rail, we'll melt half the coils." Bishop stood beside her, eyes scanning the reports. He didn't ask how bad it was. He already knew. The Revenant was dying. "We have one last strike," he said, as if that was enough. Monroe didn't even flinch. He was next to them, sitting on a crate, arms crossed. His shirt was torn, his shoulder bandaged with tape. "We're not surviving another run." Bishop finally looked at him. "We don't have to survive it." A pause, just long enough for the silence to settle in. "We just have to make it count." The target was the core citadel, the heart of the Empire, floating above the throne world, orbiting a planet they once used to display power and parade their dominance. The citadel was more than a station. It was a symbol. Command, authority, fear. Destroying it wouldn't win the war, But it would break the myth of the Empire's invincibility. That was all humanity needed. Hope didn't grow in victory. It grew in cracks. And Bishop was about to drive a damn crater through the center of the Empire. They set course manually. No nav AI, no guidance. Micah sat strapped in with a cable running from her spine interface into the ship's core systems, directing the dying beast through raw will. It took days. Days of silent corridors, flickering lights, and whispered conversations. There were fewer people now, 48 in total. That included 2 injured fighters who couldn't walk, and an engineer with a punctured lung. But every one of them volunteered. No one begged to turn back. No one cried for survival. This wasn't about making it out. It was about making sure the Empire never forgot Earth. They arrived on the edge of the Citadel's defense net. Bishop stood on the bridge, staring at the monstrous structure through a cracked viewport. It looked like a crown of blades wrapped around a molten core, huge, arrogant, and pulsing with the Empire's signature blue energy. Thousands of lights blinked across its surface. Shuttles zipped in and out of the bays. Warships patrolled in tight formations. It was alive, and it had no idea what was coming. Micah's voice broke the silence. If we're doing this, we have to move now. If we wait, we'll get scanned. They'll know this isn't one of theirs. Bishop nodded. Then we move. They had one card left, the Revenant's identity codes. Even broken and burning, the dreadnought still screamed Imperial DNA to the outer layers of the Citadel's defenses. They used it. Slipped through, no questions, no alarms. The last gift of stolen arrogance. They approached the lowest ring of the Citadel, and then dropped every mask at once. Bishop gave the order, "Weapons hot, target the spine reactor, open fire." The Revenant's battered guns lit up. The first rail round tore into the Citadel's underside, punching through armor and igniting fuel conduits. Then came the missiles. Micah launched the last of their payload, a cluster of fragmentation warheads designed to tear apart anything soft inside. Alarms screamed across the Citadel, comms burst to life, panicked voices, orders, confusion. The Empire couldn't comprehend it. They hadn't prepared for one of their own ships to turn suicidal. They hadn't imagined that the weapon they built would ever point itself back at their heart. 6 in total. The last of their ground team. Bishop led one, Monroe another. The rest carried fighters, engineers, and explosives. They crashed through the Citadel's outer ring like nails through glass. Empire troops met them instantly. Elite guards in heavy armor, stun rifles, suppressor drones. The fighting was hell. Every corner a death trap. Every hallway lit by gunfire and the hiss of overheating weapons. Bishop moved through it like a ghost of war, killing with precision, leading through example. Monroe was fire, loud, brutal, and impossible to stop. They fought their way to the core, not to capture it, to detonate it. Micah was already inside the systems, remotely linked from the Revenant, tearing through firewalls with the fury of a species pushed too far. Her hands bled from cable burns, her jaw clenched with every encrypted block she shattered. They planted the bombs manually, high yield, proximity triggered, tied directly into the Citadel's rotation generators. When it was set, Bishop gave the order to pull the team back. Most didn't make it. One by one, his crew fell. Holding lines, setting diversions, dragging wounded through gunfire. Monroe covered the rear, firing until his weapon overheated, and he had to beat a guard to death with the stock. They reached the last evac pod. Bishop stepped in, dragging a wounded fighter whose name he never learned. Monroe limped behind, smoke pouring off his armor. Then they launched. The pod shot out into the void just as the Revenant, floating above the citadel like a broken angel, detonated. Micah triggered the failsafe from her interface. The dreadnought's core ruptured. A white flare filled the system. And then the citadel shattered. The explosion was heard across a dozen systems. Empire broadcasts cut off mid-sentence. Starports paused transmissions. Entire fleets fell silent. The citadel was gone. Not damaged. Erased. No one had done that. No one had dared to even try. Until Earth. The escape pod drifted for days. Inside, it was dark, cold. Air was thin. Monroe was unconscious. The wounded fighter didn't make it. Bishop sat in silence. He didn't pray. Didn't reflect. He waited. Eventually, a signal came through. Static. Then a voice. Human. Copy. Bishop, if you're out there, we saw it. The citadel's gone. Then more. You're a goddamn ghost. They're retreating on Kirillon. You gave them fear. We're fighting again. We're winning. Bishop leaned back, eyes closed. Earth was still a joke to the Empire. But now they were laughing less, and bleeding more. The escape pod drifted for 9 days before a salvager unit from a rebel-linked trade vessel found them. The ship wasn't official resistance. It didn't carry flags, transmit codes, or bear any allegiance. But it was human. That was enough. They pulled Bishop and Monroe out of the pod like they were ancient relics. Bishop was still conscious. Barely. His skin was dry, lips cracked. He hadn't moved in hours. He just stared through the viewport, watching the stars pass by like he was trying to memorize them all before he died. Monroe wasn't breathing when they found him. They shocked him twice. On the third try, his eyes flew open and he vomited black fluid all over the medtech. He lived. Barely. The medbay smelled like rust and burnt gel. Old tech. Cheap fixers. But Bishop didn't complain. He sat up on the cot, still hooked to the IV bag, when the captain of the salvager came in. He was an older man. Real earthborn. Skin like cracked leather. Cybernetic left eye flickering with static. He didn't salute, didn't speak right away. He just looked at Bishop like he was staring at a ghost. "You really did it," he said finally. Bishop didn't reply. The old man sat on the edge of the counter. "Citadel's gone, wiped clean. Empire's in chaos. There's a bounty on your head higher than any warlord in 3 systems." Bishop only nodded once. "Names?" the man asked, almost quietly. "What names?" Bishop rasped. "Your crew! Who else made it?" Bishop's jaw clenched. No one spoke for a long time. The old man stood. "They're calling it the Requiem Strike. Whole colonies are rising. Resistance cells that never spoke to each other before are linking up. Even some alien fringe groups are watching, thinking maybe the Empire can bleed after all." He paused near the door. "You lit the match. Now everyone's waiting to see if you're going to burn the rest of the forest." News of the Citadel's destruction spread like fire in a vacuum. The Empire tried to control it, called it a reactor malfunction, a terrorist attack by rogue AIs, a malfunctioning dreadnought. But the truth leaked faster than they could plug it. Humans had done this. A race they'd deemed laughable, weak, barbaric, primitive. And now that primitive race had shown the stars what rage looked like. All across occupied sectors, human slaves rose up. Underground resistance groups in distant colonies launched coordinated strikes. Even some minor Empire commanders defected, unwilling to serve a regime that couldn't even defend its own throne. The war had changed. And everyone knew it. Bishop didn't want fame. Didn't care about revolution, flags, or being remembered. But he couldn't walk away. He owed the dead too much. So when the salvager docked with a small rebel station hidden in the rings of a shattered moon, Bishop stepped off that ramp not as a survivor, but as the start of something worse. Something more dangerous. Something the Empire couldn't erase. The station wasn't much. Bare walls, flickering lights, too many people in too little space. But it was alive. Fighters trained in converted mess halls. Engineers worked double shifts, rewiring stolen drones into defense turrets. Even kids ran data packets across the upper levels. Bishop didn't speak to crowds. He wasn't that man. But his presence alone stirred something. They all knew who he was. The man who killed the Citadel. He met with resistance leaders one by one. No titles, no ranks, just names and scars. Some were ex-soldiers, some were smugglers. A few were just farmers who'd had their homes taken. They all wanted the same thing. And now they had something close to a plan. Phase 1 was sabotage. Bishop coordinated a multi-sector strike against the Empire's secondary supply lines. Fuel depots, ammo freighters, repair yards, all vulnerable now that the fleet was scrambling to secure core systems. He didn't lead these raids himself. He taught others how. He trained them in the ugly warfare Earth had mastered. Ambushes, dirty tricks, psychological traps. Not noble, not clean, but devastating. In 4 weeks, the Empire lost 17 convoys and 3 refueling stations. A munitions plant exploded in orbit over Dalthus Prime. A dreadnought en route to Earth was rerouted after someone leaked false intelligence about a virus outbreak on board. Each strike carried the same message, broadcast just before detonation. This is for Earth. It wasn't signed, but they knew. Monroe healed slowly. His right leg was permanently damaged. He walked with a brace now, a mechanical one that clicked every other step. He hated it. But he never complained. He joined Bishop in the training bay when he could, watching the new recruits struggle to aim, to breathe, to stop shaking. "They're not ready," Monroe muttered. "They won't ever be," Bishop said. "Not for what's coming." "What is coming?" Bishop looked at him with dead eyes. "We're not winning a war." Monroe frowned. "Then what are we doing?" "We're making it unwinnable." The Empire escalated. They deployed something new. Null squads. Augmented warriors. No names, no faces. Genetically enhanced, mind-linked, bred for extermination. They didn't talk, didn't hesitate. They dropped into rebel-held worlds like meteors, wiped out entire towns, then vanished. One attacked a medical outpost supplying Bishop's sector. 76 dead in 4 minutes. No survivors. Bishop responded, not with bombs, but with a capture. He tracked the Null Squad to a mining colony they were using as a rest point. He didn't bring an army. Just himself, Monroe, and 4 of his best from the old Revenant crew. They ambushed the squad in a narrow shaft under the colony, used sonic disruptors to blind them, flash charges to disorient, and EMP spikes to cripple their suits. Then Bishop executed them one by one. He left one alive. Strapped to a metal chair, broadcast the image to every Empire channel he could tap into. The soldier was bleeding, gasping. Behind him, Bishop stepped into view. No mask, no helmet, just human. Alive, defiant. "This is your best?" Bishop growled. "Then you deserve extinction." He didn't wait for a reply. He pulled the trigger. The screen went dark. The message was clear. Earth hadn't just survived. It had evolved. And now it was teaching the galaxy how to hate. They tried to turn Bishop into a myth. The Empire, desperate to regain control of the narrative, claimed he was a fabrication, an AI-generated face built to stir unrest. Some broadcasts painted him as a traitor created by rogue elements within the Empire itself. Others said he'd already been killed, that the Citadel bombing had been a suicide mission. But planets kept burning under human fire, and Bishop kept showing up in places the Empire thought untouchable. He was no myth. He was a ghost with a gun and a purpose. Rebel command, if it could even be called that, shifted its tone. Before, it had been about survival. Now, it was about escalation. More cells rose. Independent crews coordinated strikes across sectors. Bishop's influence spread like fire across dry brush. His tactics, vicious, raw, unfiltered, became the foundation of an unofficial doctrine. Fight dirty. Make them fear you. Leave no witnesses. There was no anthem, no speeches, just a symbol etched into the hulls of stolen ships, scrawled on ruined walls, painted in the blood of fallen Empire soldiers. A cracked planet. Earth breaking its chains. Monroe had turned his limp into a weapon. He'd refuse help, even when pain made him sweat bullets. "It reminds me what they took," he said once, voice low. He now ran the combat trials for new recruits. He beat the hell out of most of them. No one complained. If you could survive Monroe, you might survive the next drop. Bishop watched it all unfold with a kind of detached clarity. He wasn't trying to build an army. He was trying to spread an infection, something the Empire couldn't isolate, contain, or control. And it was working. But then came the massacre at Lithan 3, a rebel-friendly farming world, remote, sparse, civilian. The Empire descended without warning. They didn't use null squads this time. They used orbital cleansing. No ground troops, no broadcasts, just silence and fire. 3 minutes. That's how long it took to reduce the planet to glass. Bishop arrived a day too late. The ashes still drifted in the wind as he walked through the remains of a town center that had once flown a human flag. Children's toys melted into the pavement. A wedding ring fused to a scorched skeleton's finger. Micah, who'd only just returned from a systems raid, stood beside him. "They're not scared anymore," she said quietly. "They're furious." "No," Bishop replied, voice hoarse. "They're both." That night, he sat in his quarters alone, listening to old Earth recordings, static-laced memories of forests, ocean tides, city sounds, things he barely remembered, things he'd never hear again. He opened a comm channel to the few leaders he still trusted. "We're ending it. No discussion. No strategy meetings. Just a voice made of stone." The target was Helion Prime, the central AI core world, buried beneath 7 layers of atmosphere and defended by half the Empire's fleet. Every communication, surveillance scan, troop deployment, and satellite feed passed through Helion's servers. It was the brain. You kill the brain, the body twitches in the dark. Suicide, they called it. Bishop didn't flinch. "I'm not asking." He gathered 40 ships, patched together, undergunned, half of them barely holding in place with duct tape level repairs. It didn't matter. They had nothing left to lose. The fleet moved in 3 jumps, no formation, no synchronized arrival, just chaos. Just how Bishop liked it. They punched through the outer defenses in waves, leaving trails of wreckage and dead behind them. Micah led the electronic warfare units, frying comms, disrupting sensors, confusing defense satellites until they turned on each other. Monroe led the boarding crews, slamming through frigates and cruisers, killing anything that breathed Empire air. Bishop led the charge to the surface. His team, only 12 now, descended into the hellscape of Helion's upper atmosphere in a repurposed drop bomber. They didn't expect to return. None of them even said goodbye. The descent was brutal. Lightning storms tore at the hull. Acidic rain scorched the viewports. The ship rattled like it was held together by prayers and hate. When they breached the final layer, the AI Citadel came into view. It wasn't a city. It was a machine. Towers like fangs, lights pulsing with synthetic life, drones circling like vultures. They crashed through a wall and came in guns hot. The resistance was immediate. Turrets, security bots, atmospheric drones, all controlled by the same mind. Micah began her work in the core chamber, plugging into the AI interface using her spine jack, breathing hard, teeth clenched. "I've got 30 seconds before it overrides me," she gasped. "That's 20 too many," Bishop muttered, pulling her into cover just as a bolt of plasma torched the spot she was standing in. Monroe was already laying down suppressive fire, shouting orders, tossing shock grenades. The air stank of ozone, blood, and burning metal. Bishop stepped over a twitching drone and knelt beside Micah. "Can you kill it?" he asked. She didn't respond at first. Then, "I can erase it." "Do it!" It took 12 seconds. The lights in the chamber flickered, then died. Then returned, red, pulsing. Alarms went dead. Drone eyes shut down mid-flight. Then, nothing. Just silence. A silence the galaxy hadn't heard in generations. The brain was dead. But the price? Everyone in the chamber died. Except Bishop. Micah's final breath was through blood-flecked lips as she whispered, "We burned their gods." Monroe bled out with a grin on his face, back against the wall, still gripping a detonator. Bishop carried their tags out with him, one by one. The fleet above Helion didn't retreat. They held. Even as the remaining Empire ships returned with fury, they didn't break. They wanted the last blow to mean something. By the time Bishop made it to orbit again, over half his fleet was gone. But the Citadel was dust. And now Helion was blind. The Empire fractured, commanders went dark, colonies broke away, occupied planets rose in mass rebellion, communications collapsed, coordination failed. In a matter of weeks, the once mighty machine that had ruled hundreds of systems became a broken echo of itself. And the one name on every survivor's lips, Bishop. The war didn't end with a treaty. There was no signing of papers, no flags lowered, no dignitaries shaking hands before a crowd of smiling diplomats. It ended in silence. A slow, bitter unraveling. The Empire, once a perfect cold machine of dominance and order, now stood fractured. Entire sectors broke off without warning. Vassal species revolted. Military ranks dissolved into infighting, paranoia, and scattered remnants that couldn't even agree on who was in charge. Their fleets drifted. Their governors vanished. And their AI systems, once feared omnipresences, remained dark, gutted by the death of Helion. All because a few Earthborn didn't know how to kneel. Bishop sat alone on a cold rock in the middle of an unnamed asteroid field. The war was over. But he didn't feel victorious. He hadn't smiled in months. He wore the same armor he'd worn since Helion. It was blackened, dented, and burned beyond repair. His left shoulder bore a deep gouge from the plasma drone that nearly killed him. His pulse rifle sat across his knees, long out of ammunition. He kept it anyway. Not as a weapon anymore, as memory. The small rebel ship that found him had no official markings. It had been trailing scattered comms, bursts believed to be from Bishop, encrypted pings sent out once every few days. Like a heartbeat. Weak but steady. They brought him back. Back to what remained of the resistance. Back to humanity. Earth wasn't the same planet anymore, not because it had healed, but because it had evolved. Cities weren't rebuilt in the old image. They rose like scars, half underground, armored, efficient. Survivors ran them. Engineers, former soldiers, children who had grown up on stories of fire and blood. They didn't try to forget the war. They wore it like a second skin. Bishop returned without parade or welcome. No one needed to cheer. His presence was enough. He walked among them like a storm remembered. Old, quiet, watching. Some called him a hero. Most just called him the reason we're still breathing. He spent his days watching the horizon from the edge of a ridge that overlooked the ruins of an old Earth city. No one remembered what it had been called. Maybe New York. Maybe Delhi. Maybe nothing. The buildings were just bones now. But humanity had learned how to live among bones. Children played in the ash, building towers out of broken drone parts. Teenagers trained with rifles twice their size. Adults wore simple uniforms, more utility than pride, and kept working. Farming, digging, reconstructing. Humanity wasn't rebuilding to return to what it was. It was building to make sure this never happened again. They asked Bishop once to speak to the new militia cadets. A fresh class of young fighters, some born during the war, others just old enough to remember the first Empire ships cutting through the clouds. He stepped into the training ground wearing the same scorched armor, helmet tucked under his arm, and stood before them with that same cold stare. "What was it like?" one kid asked. Barely 16, hand wrapped around a modified sidearm, eyes full of that old curiosity. Bishop looked at him and said the only truth he could. It never stopped hurting. The war was won, but the cost was never forgotten. Micah's face haunted him when he saw the tech labs, young engineers pulling apart Empire drones and building new satellites out of the wreckage. Monroe's voice echoed every time Bishop heard someone bark orders in a combat drill. Even the nameless, those he'd lost and never had time to remember, lived on in every scarred street, every patched hull, every tattooed name inked on fighter pilot arms across the new rebel fleet. The fleet had a name now. The Revenants. Ships crafted from broken parts, held together with desperation, and painted black with the symbol of Earth, the cracked planet. And Bishop? He refused to lead them. He didn't want command, he didn't want statues. But he gave them one thing more powerful than speeches. He gave them permission to keep fighting. To never forget that Earth had been mocked. That it had been left to burn. And that in return, humanity had set the stars ablaze. Years passed. The Empire became myth. Some small remnants tried to rise again, isolated systems claiming old titles, trying to piece together power. But the galaxy had seen what happened when humans got angry. No one dared test that again. Other species came to Earth, not as conquerors, but as equals. Broken races that had also tasted the Empire's heel. Now they sought what humans had found. Fire in the ashes. And Earth gave it freely, not as overlords, but as survivors. Bishop aged slowly. Not because of miracle drugs or medtech, but because the hate had refused to let him rest. Until one day, it finally did. They found him sitting in the same spot on the ridge, rifle across his knees, eyes closed, breath still. The wind had coated his armor in dust. He died the same way he lived, watching, waiting, refusing to run. They didn't bury him in the ground. They set him into orbit. A black coffin, no name, no broadcast, just drifting above Earth, just like the Revenant had once hovered over Kirellin before it turned the sky red. On the hull of the coffin, etched in steel, were the only words that ever needed to be said. He made them bleed. And so the galaxy changed. Not because humans were special, not because they were destined, but because they were denied peace and taught how to fight back with nothing but will. They were mocked, they were conquered, and when they lost everything, they made sure the stars remembered their name.